yesterday we started a topic which is on death, and this is the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita that we read a few of the verses. So we're going to continue on with our discussion today. So we'll be talking more about different death as a door, right? And death allowing us to enter into many different realms. So it's not the end. You know, sometimes people think that to die means it's the end of everything, or that this is the only life we have, and once we die, then you know, everything ends. But actually, it is described in the Bhagavad Gita that death simply means a change of body. It simply means changing address and moving into a different reality. And so that's what we're going to try and discuss today. And even science, actually, right? You know, in our previous sessions where we talked about the difference between the body and the soul, and we talked about consciousness, one of the things we discussed was that how consciousness is eternal and that it survives the death of this physical body. And we also talked about how the soul, is actually accompanied by two different kinds of bodies. One is the gross body, which is what is left behind. But there is a subtle body that actually accompanies the soul as the soul travels through countless bodies in this world, right? So that subtle body is mind, intelligence, and false ego. So that, you know, as long as we are still bound in this material world, we continue to go through the cycle of birth and death again and again. And we have different destinations based on. So we'll, you know, I guess we can maybe start our presentation and then.
Yeah, so
You'll have to mute yourself. So this is oh, sorry. So we should maybe first introduce who this person is. This is Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know if you are familiar with her, but well, she has two different identities. Go ahead, why don't you?
So she is a congresswoman from Hawaii, and she's also a devotee. She grew up as a devotee, was homeschooled, and she became a congresswoman from Hawaii, and she took her oath on the Bhagavad-Gita. So she
was actually one of the candidates, right, for the primaries.
Yeah, she's from the Democratic Party. She stood as one of the presidential candidates. So she's describing, she was deployed in Iraq, where she was actually on the battlefront, and she's describing her experience about that here in this video.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Representative for Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District and Hawaii Army National Guard veteran, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
In a camp about 40 miles north of Baghdad. Then the first couple of days that we were there in this camp, it was within the Sunni Triangle. It was a time where there were, unfortunately, a lot of casualties. I was figuring out where things were, orienting myself, and I saw at one of the major gates to this camp a huge sign that read in big black letters, "Is today the day?" And I kind of stood there and looked at it for a minute, reflecting on what this meant. And it would continue to serve as a reminder, not just for me, but for all of us who were there, who would go in and out of this gate, who would see it as we went about our business every day, that any day could be the day. About the fragility of life, about the temporary nature of these bodies and how our time could come at any moment. We had a chaplain there who was from American Samoa, and he would often preach in his sermons.
So this is actually the very basis, right, of our, philosophy is this understanding that our life here is, we're all just passing through.
Yeah, Prabhupada made this comment, right?
Mm.
Philosophy means to be aware.
To always keep death
Death in
in the front,
Mm.
right? So this is our, what if we do that, then this actually helps us, and as we, in fact, are the very, also another thing that Prabhupada would often say is that life is like a preparation for the final exam, and death is like the final exam. And so, the entire Vedic tradition, is actually centered around this preparation for this final moment. And it's all about preparing our consciousness. And this human body especially is actually a great boat that allows us to cross over and defeat death. And that is actually considered to be the foremost of all heroism, right? Is to take on this great task. And Prabhupada would often say that, we're spending so much time on different kinds of research, but we should try to research how I can overcome birth, death, old age, and disease. So.
Just have.
So this is a story from Mahabharata about King Yudhishthir, who's all his brothers. He discovered that one day he sent them out to get some water from a lake one by one, and none of them returned. So finally, when he went there, he saw all of them dead there. And as soon as he tried to get some water for himself, this yaksha, a very powerful entity, he appeared and he said, "You cannot drink water from this until you answer all my questions."
So there were many questions that he asked, and one of the questions that he asked, by the way, Yudhishthir is the older brother of Arjuna, the person who Krishna is speaking to in the Bhagavad-Gita. And so one of the questions that he asked was, what is the most wondrous thing in this world? So
and he replies that ahani ahani cha bhutani gachanti ha yamalayam sheshastavaram icchanti kim ascharyam atah param.
So the English translation is, hundreds and thousands of living entities meet death at every moment, but a foolish living being nonetheless thinks himself deathless and does not prepare for death. This is the most wonderful thing in the world. And we see that there is such a covering, right? That people, it's something that we all know, right? Each one of us, we know this, but we live like we're going to be here forever. In fact, there is a story of this great rishi called
Lomash
Rishi, and he was a great sage, and he had a lot of hair on his body, and so in one hair would go ahead. You give the math of that.
So he had a bone that for every hair on his body would fall.
1 day of.
He would live for 1 day of Brahma. So 1 day of Brahma is 4.3 billion years. And he was a very hairy guy. So you can imagine how long his lifespan was. So one day he was sitting in the sun and meditating. And then all his disciples, they saw him. Oh, why is he sitting in the sun? Let's give him some protection. So they started building like a hut over his head. And that broke the hustle and bustle, broke the meditation of the sage. And he asked them, what's going on? He said, we wanted to protect you from sun. So he replied that, why are you wasting your life? Life is not meant for preparing for comforts and things like that. It's meant for self-realization.
Well, actually, the way he responded was, life is very short.
Life is very short.
So that was his response. And this is considering the fact that, he had a very, 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 very long lifespan. There's another story, on a completely different note, which is about this little insect that oftentimes you see that they only live for just one night, right? So in the morning when you wake up, so when you go to sleep, like in traditional, like in villages and stuff, they would have these little lamps, and then they get attracted by the light of the lamp, and then they would hover. In the morning when you wake up, you see them lying dead around the lamp, at the bottom of the lamp. And so one time, this tiny insect actually approached a human being and said, hey, you guys are really lucky. Like you guys get to live like 100 years, and I just get to live one night. So in 100 years, you must probably be doing so much more. So what do you guys do in 100 years? And this man, he replied, well, we take birth, and then we play, and then we grow, a little bit older, then we get married, and then we have children, and then we grow, older, and then, old age comes over, and then we die. And so this little insect looked at the man with like complete like wonder, and he said, really? It takes you that long to do this? So the point, and
We
this
do all this in one night.
yeah, we do all of this in one night. So the point being that this is actually what Maharaj Yudhishthir said is the most amazing thing, that we are seeing, this flow, this constant flow out, but we're all thinking that I'm going to be here forever.
And I guess that when we think like that I'm going to be here forever, the other side of that thinking is produces that I'm okay, or I will be okay. If I'm not okay today, I will be okay tomorrow. So Prabhupada gives the example of this goat who are waiting in a line to be taken for slaughter, and one goat is all the goats are kind of busy munching on the grass.
And they're completely unaware,
Yeah.
right? And they're actually eating the grass on the side, and they're thinking, life is quite good, like, okay, I'm okay, And so this kind of mindset is actually a covering of Maya that allows us to go through life thinking that, yeah, this is my home, and all this money that I'm accumulating and everything that I can do, right? So much money do I have today, and so much more I can make tomorrow. So that whole mindset is actually based around the sense that this place is my permanent residence. And the Vedas actually come in, all ancient wisdom texts, they come in very strong, and they try to cut off that knot of illusion, and they say, no, this is not your permanent place. So again, another strong, we've gone through this, but we just thought we'll do it again, since this kind of really connects with this idea. We won't spend too much time, but can we do this real quick? Yeah. So basically, in this little image, you have a person who's, is actually supposed to be upside down, hanging by a branch, and there is an elephant that is actually shaking this tree trunk, and he's actually hanging in such a way that if he falls, he actually falls into a deep dark valley. And then, as you can see, there is a beehive there, and so because the elephant is shaking it, the bees actually start to come and they start stinging this poor man. And then there is a black cat and a black mouse and a white mouse, right? And they're cutting the branch of this tree. And in the midst of all of this, there's a drop of honey that drops on the tongue of this man, and he thinks, oh, life is beautiful, right? So as you can imagine, that the white mouse.
Yeah, so the elephant is the death, powerful death that is approaching us and shaking our life upside down. The black and white mouse represent day and night. The bees represent the different living beings, family members, relatives, other people who are giving us trouble, and so on and so forth. And the little honey that we get is the honey of money or whatever power, prestige, bodily pleasures that we get. We think that makes our life good.
So here is, coming back to our discussion on death, because, we can receive death as we want to be received, as we would like to receive, because Krishna describes in the Bhagavad-Gita 3 different ways that we can actually receive death. So either death can be perceived as this all-devouring, energy of God, which is, like an axe. It comes in a merciless manner and it kills us, right? And we are helpless in the face of it. And the other feature is what we'll talk about is like a tool, which the yogis use, where they're able to use death to sort of go into a different realm.
It's like riding death as like a person rides a horse to make the journey.
And then the third one, which is an embrace, and that is a third way, and that is the way of bhakti. So we'll talk more about the embrace. We'll talk about tomorrow. So here is a story. here is a story. Just want to see the timing. Okay, here is a story of this sage who was walking one time, and he meets 4 different people. So first of all, he meets a prince. So a prince is someone who is living a very opulent life, and yeah, so he's living a very opulent life. So when he meets the prince, he blesses him by saying, Rajaputra Chiranjiva. So he says that, which in Sanskrit, so it translates into, may you live a long life. And then he proceeds a little bit further, and he comes across like a Muniputra. How would you describe a Muniputra?
Muniputra is like a brahmachari, a celibate monk who's dedicated to absolute truth. So to him, the sage blesses him, Ma Jiva, which means you better die right now. You don't have to live anymore. Meaning that your life is already perfect. You haven't really misused your life in any way, but dedicated completely to Brahman. So if you die right now, you'll go back to the spiritual world.
And for the prince, the reason why he says that may you have a long life is because he's obviously enjoying the fruits of his past karma. So if he dies, he's going to have a much worse life in his next life. So he's like, okay, have a good life, make best use of it. And then thirdly, he meets a sadhu, like a devotee. So for him, he says, Jiva va marava, which means that whether you live or you die doesn't matter, right? Meaning that for a devotee, actually life and death are exactly the same, because in this life, a devotee is liberated even while living in this body. And after death, he will continue on doing exactly the same thing. So there's no difference. And while living in this world, because he's not affected by the impact of this material energy, so for him, even being in this world is the same as being in this spiritual world. And then to a person who is a very cruel butcher, he says,
Ma Jiva, Ma Mara, that neither do you live nor do you die, because your life is hell right now as you're living, and after you die, you'll get into even more hellish situations. So you basically are suspended.
Yeah, so we can see how, for different people, these different things are expressed to indicate that how we all have different destinations, right? And so kind of going back to that same idea. Now, when we talk about death as an axe, Krishna says that, Prabhupada also writes in many different places that, some people say, well, I'm never going to surrender to God, right? I'm never, surrender is out of the question. But actually, we all have to surrender, right? And we all have to finally submit to this death. Like, for example, if you're really attached to our possessions, and we may say, I'm never going to give up, this thing or that thing. But actually, when that's the meaning of death. It's the ultimate humbling experience for a living entity, because it comes and it takes everything that we have accumulated. So this is a little, video about how, there are dictators who spend their whole life, trying to control everybody and with a complete display of power and position, right? And being so cruel. And it is actually, there are articles about this where it says that many of these dictators, they actually end up with a very violent death. So in this case, one can see that death is coming to them as an axe in a very grim way, and ending all their so-called plans.
We want to get rich.
Just one second.
To our top story this morning, the killing of Muammar Gaddafi. This morning, his burial is on hold, and there are still a lot of questions over how the longtime dictator died on Thursday. CBS News correspondent Elizabeth Palmer is in Tripoli, Libya this morning with the latest. Liz, good morning.
Morning, Jeff. Well, a few more details may emerge from some new amateur video available this morning, presumably taken by one of the rebel fighters who was on the scene at his capture. We should warn you, though, it does contain some graphic images. The violent death of a violent dictator. Gaddafi's final moments face to face with his captors, pleading for his life. The end came just outside his birthplace of Sirte. He was shot by revolutionary forces who broke their promise to keep him alive to face trial, but few seem to regret it. Libya's Prime Minister.
So sorry if that was a little intense, but we just wanted to share that to show that all our attempts, right, to conquer and to control and to exploit, right, it all finds its sort of final end, right, at the face of death or the hands of death, and that's the kind of death that the Vedas actually try to discourage us from. That our lives are very precious, and if we live our life, just like yesterday we discussed, right, how Socrates said that you can tell if someone's lived a happy life by the way they actually leave this world, right? So it's a very significant thing to prepare ourselves for this final moment. And one of the things that the Vedic texts talk about is death can either be the experience of being carried in the mouth of a cat as a mouse. So when the mouse is actually, or when the rat is in the mouth of a cat, then it feels like it's literally in the jaws of death, right? And it is helpless, and it knows that it's going to be finished now, right? And but is there another way to be carried by the same cat? Okay.
And that's okay.
So since we have paused, maybe we can,
Yeah, take some comments, reflections
and
so
then,
far.
yeah.
I was just wondering, like, this process of death and like reincarnating is like, you get a moment like as a soul to reconnect with source or with God, or do you automatically like reincarnate?
Your voice was not so clear.
Oh, sorry. Can you
Yeah.
hear me okay? Well,
Yeah.
my computer fan is a little loud.
Okay, yeah, I think this is better. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering, like, when you die, if there's a moment where you can like reconnect with source or with God, or if you reincarnate automatically.
Oh, it all depends, right?
Yeah, I mean, the super soul is in charge of where we will go depending on our activities and our desires. So we'll talk more about that, like what are the destinations, different destinations that are possible. But God or super soul, he's in charge of our next reincarnation, where we will go.
And the reflection is always there. That's part of, that connection is always there. And people do, in fact, in the final moments, sometimes have some profound realizations. And I think one of the things that we'll talk about is like even the top regrets, right, of a dying person, which was documented by a nurse as she, took care of so many people as they were leaving. So, we do get our most profound realizations of the sanctity of life when everything that is superficial is actually stripped away. Death means the stripping away of everything that is superfluous to us, right? So in those moments, depending on how thick our covering is, somebody can also find a very deep connection with God, even though they have never previously even had one, right? And we see that. We have, in our own life, we have seen, people confronted with this, and suddenly there's a transformation, and they want to, connect. So that option is there at every second. It doesn't matter whether we are in the final moment or before or after. That opportunity is always there for us. I don't know, Dominic, if that's kind of where you were going with this.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Okay.
So I have two questions on what the like the kind of experience of death is like. I don't know if you guys know the answer, but my first question is, wait, sorry, I think there's something on my computer. My first question is, like, do people, like, how common is it to lose consciousness prior to the moment of death? Is it more common for people to lose consciousness prior to the moment of death and then regain consciousness kind of in some new situation? Or do people kind of have a continuous experience of like the end of their life through death and then into their next, whatever their next situation is? And then, so that's my first question. And my second question is, do like for say for a reason, I know this probably varies based on one's occupation and type of spirituality, but does one reincarnate? Say someone's like a reasonably pious person, do they reincarnate immediately, or there's kind of an intermediate period where they kind of just have a subtle body without having a material body?
I can see that. Yeah. Well, your first question. Let's see. What was your first question again? That could you?
Do people lose consciousness before dying, or are people conscious through the experience of death?
Well, I mean, some people could be fully conscious. Some people could be in coma, some people could be semi-conscious or maybe drifting in and out of consciousness. It all depends on so many. And now, of course, with our modern system of dying, so many people actually are on heavy, like drugs, right? Pain medication and stuff. So there is that. But at the same time, having said that, there is always the consciousness, which is always aware. And there are stories of how even people who are, sort of in coma, they're able to hear. And there have been documented studies of that people are actually able to hear, and that hearing is like sort of the last sense to go. And actually what to speak of while dying, even some people, have come back from near-death experiences and reported that even though they were declared clinically dead, but they could still hear. So the consciousness is always, aware and conscious. Now, whether it's functioning through the gross and subtle body, that's another thing. And that depends on so many different factors. But
that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
But most of the time, Prabhupada says the pain is so intense that it knocks out the consciousness. And the person may experience the pain and it may knock out the consciousness. So
it's hard to...
It's all secondhand knowledge because we don't have experience of it.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I guess, I mean, the pain is kind of what I was worried about, because I've heard that dying is very painful. At least, I mean, I think it depends on how you die, but I think that dying is often very painful. But I don't know. Yeah.
And that's kind of, I'm glad you brought that up, and we'll deal with this more. But, this whole idea of death being painful is also related to the subtle body's attachment to this body, to this world. So there is a physical aspect of that pain, but there is actually a deeper psychological aspect to that pain as well, which is actually defined to be much, much more than the physical pain of leaving this body. And so that is actually the process of bhakti yoga, is to die before dying. I'm sort of giving you the, this next segment that we're going to get into. But the whole idea of die before dying is to actually separate the subtle body from the gross body so that the soul is free to leave. In that case, the pain would be that much less. To the extent that we are entangled, to that extent, it would be hard, right?
Okay.
In the culture, the body is burnt the same day, so that when the body is gone and the soul that is left can give up the attachment to this body. Because the body stays around, then it's hard for the soul to give up that attachment.
Interesting, because there is some lingering attachment, even like a day or two after death.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And that's the
subtle body. The subtle body is longing to find that gross body that it left behind.
Yeah, and that's why it is. And that's why right after dying, people continue to chant and read, and so that the soul can make that passage, So anyways, those are, we'll get into that more. And I guess your second question, maybe we can come back. Is it again?
Oh yeah, we might have time now. It's for a reasonably pious person, does the person get another gross body right away, or do they have a period of time of being in a subtle body?
It's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell, but I think there is a possibility that the person would just have to experience. Prabhupada actually talks about that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that depending on your activities in this current life, one may actually have to go through some period of subtle enjoyment or subtle pain, and then get a suitable body, because by that time you've acclimatized yourself, to that kind of life. And so then you may get the body of a dog or whatever, animal or whatever, plant life. So there is that aspect also. So let's see, the moments prior to death could be violent, but the mind itself could be calm and turn towards the divine. Does the death experience has to be peaceful, that is just die without any pain to define a good life? Or does the mind which is calm during death experiences, defines a good life. Soldiers in war could have violent death experience, but could have die happily knowing that they're serving. Very nice point. Should I?
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Lokadaksha is not feeling so good today, so I'm kind of stepping in. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the, when we talk about a good death, it's really talking about the state of consciousness. So someone could actually go through pain or difficulties, but if their consciousness is actually connected to the Supreme, or if they're feeling peaceful, then that is what a good death would be. Not necessarily that there is no pain, right? We come into the world asking this question, Koham, who am I? Hopefully when we leave, we attaining the awareness, Soham, I am the eternal soul. Yeah, that's nice. Yes, that's very nice. Yes, that is actually what our purpose is, to realize that we are not this body, right? Are our past, future lives chronological as we know it? Can I come back in ancient Rome, or are all our lives happening at the same time? Childbirth is also very painful. It is also an ending to one thing and a beginning to a new thing. Nice. I have not, I mean, it depends. Of course, we know the time is cyclical. So, it may be different yuga, in a different.
Yeah, I mean, all the lives are not happening simultaneously. All our lives are happening in a chronological order, because the time flows chronologically in a universe, in a particular universe. And the same yuga cycles will be repeated. And if somebody is really attached to Rome, ancient Rome, then maybe they will take birth again, maybe in some another universe where the ancient Rome is something similar to ancient Rome is there. Who knows?
It's hard to
tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. How do we reconcile violent deaths that happen to innocent good people? What's the purpose of death in childhood, or deaths that don't seem fair, just in the middle? Yeah, and Dominic, I think we have a lot of uploaded lectures on karma, and maybe when because it's so much of this is actually connected to the laws of karma. What we have performed in our past life, and what kind of death we are going to get, whether we are going to live a full life, or our life is going to be terminated in the womb, or whether when we are 10 years old. It's all part of this whole karmic cycle, because the cycle of samsara, birth and death, and I think yesterday we read that verse, right? That these fruitive activities that we engage in is the propelling force that continues our journey through, life in all these different bodies. And no, so okay, all right.
Actually, Srimad Bhagavatam gives a very detailed description of what happens when you die. And I forget the chapter, but they give you everything that depends on your karma. Whether you go to hell and the hellish conditions, whatever. It's very detailed purpose.
Right. So the point is that there is all these different things that there are reasons, and I guess it's really our karmic things. And so what seems to us as being unfair or violent is really the process of going through this world in order to realize ultimately that this place is not my home. And so that's kind of where suffering fits in. And yeah, Delia, I think Delia has something. Nice, Delia. Dominic, for example, if you commit a murder and get away with it in this life, maybe in the next life you're found guilty of something you didn't do. You might seem innocent in that life, but we don't know what our full occur. Very nice, Delia. Very nice. Yeah, right on.
In that sense, there's nobody innocent in this material world.
Yeah. And in a sense, we're all victims. We're all victims of our mind and of our mind and our senses, which is propelling us. So nice. Thank you. So maybe we'll just do a little bit more. Death is truth, but there's a lot more coming here. Okay, maybe it's good, because actually that way we can, wrap it up sooner today, because it's not feeling so good. Let's see. Death is truth. We cannot surpass it. How is the loss? Okay, yeah, I'll come to you. Death is truth. We cannot surpass it. But how is the loss of loved ones biggest fear of human being, and how can one deal with it? Okay, so we'll talk about that, right, in our subsequent discussion. Daryl and Ashley, yes, it is very interesting how many of these dictators and kings are so attached to their power given by the creator, and oftentimes in many of the scriptures, these individuals, the creator's hand comes directly in and sometimes speaks to them about the opportunity and the circumstances and then swiftly takes it away. On the
It's
opposite,
like a whole PhD thesis.
yeah, on the opposite spectrum, you have monks and yogis, monk prophets who have attained different types of enlightenment in line with the Creator. For example, the rainbow body. Me and Ashley love what you guys said about that devotees' activities continuing on into the spiritual world and how it doesn't really changing much for them. We got a chance to watch Lord Chaitanya's film you guys show, and it illustrated some of this. Very nice. Thank you. I think Rajesh, you had something you wanted to share. Go ahead.
We think life is very short, but this is a relative term, short and long.
Yes.
It depends on the purpose.
Yes.
For eating, 1 hour is too much. For sleeping, 8 hours is too much. So the time, it is related with the purpose. For this body, purpose of this body, if you understand, then it is not short.
Very nice. It's very good point.
We should understand the purpose of this body. Then our effort will be to solve that purpose, to achieve that purpose. And there will be no grief in leaving this body.
Yes. Very nice.
Then the life will feel like short.
Yeah, life. They say that life is short, but the days are long. You know, and I always like that very much. And I guess I also like this point that you made, that there's a purpose that for this body. This body is actually compared to a very suitable boat. And this whole existence, this material existence, is like a vast ocean. And so this boat has the power to actually take us across this ocean. So, okay. So it can take us across this ocean, but if we don't utilize this body for its rightful purpose, then we really, you know, it's sort of like you get a really nice car and you wake up and you polish it and you clean it, but you never take it for a drive, you know, so it doesn't really, one hasn't really utilized the car for its rightful purpose. So this human body especially is meant to transition over to our eternal spiritual realm and find our spiritual identity. That is what. And so in that sense, death is actually an artificial imposition on the pure, you know, soul. And the soul actually never dies. So there is no death for the soul. So I'm not sure what we should do, if we should continue, or we can maybe just pause here. Let's see what the time is. Let me see what's going on here. Yeah, I think I just feel more comfortable maybe doing this tomorrow when Loka is also here. If that's okay with you guys, and we can just talk right now and see if there's any further, you know, questions or comments.
I have a...
Yes, I think Bhavanit, and then Elia, then you can go ahead. Yes, Bhavanit, go ahead.
Yeah. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So my question is, so sometimes, you know, when there is a young death, you know, for instance, a son, a young guy dies. So then, you know, his parents are like they are so devastated, they're shattered by his death, and they can't take it. And, you know, at times we hear that, you know, somebody's father passed away within a short time of the son's death. So does it happen just because, you know, the father's lifespan was that much? Or do, you know, souls that are close to you, when they go away, they have this effect? Is there any truth to, you know, sort of modification of the lifespan of bodies, and sort of they, you know, they just liberate the soul and they just go away?
Yeah, both are true, actually. I mean, I guess when I say both, I'm going to define what both are. So you're right that, you know, when something like this happens, there is karma, you know, that is brought two living entities together. And the grief, so one person's karma means that early termination of that person's life, right? So they're young and they had to die, and so it's finished. But then what about the mother and the father, or the loved ones, or the friends, whoever, you know, such a close relationship? So their karmic reaction through all of that was that they have to endure that grief of separation, right? So that's their karma. Now, it's not that the person is experiencing their karma because of other person's death or whatever. It could be anything. We are all living our own individual karma. even though it may seem like our karmas are entangled, or they seem like one is affecting the other. That's one part of it. But there is also truth to the fact that they do say that there's a heartbreak syndrome, where they say that when we have a lot of grief within our heart over the death of someone, then that can actually lead to, people dying. And so sometimes you see couples who have lived together for a long time, they die together in a very short, like between a very short duration. And so there is something to be said about that. But that is again part of that same karmic destiny or karmic cycle that has brought, those two people together in that way. So both things are happening simultaneously. One is external and the other is an internal force that we cannot see.
So the bottom line still is that, if, whatever is the lifespan that Krishna has bestowed upon you, you're going to live that and go no matter what happens around you.
Well, yes, for the most part, but it's not cast in stone. Krishna can always change that,
Okay.
but for the most part, yes. I mean, the fact that a person, so, sometimes we say a person died because of corona, or a person died because, the wife left, or the husband, the son died and therefore the mother passed away. So we attribute a lot of external reasons for a person's death. But ultimately, death is always caused by one's own stockpile of karmic reactions. And so there is, that person was meant to leave the body in that way. And so that is, and then yet we have to, like, I remember, when my grandmother-in-law was very sick, and she would always say, she said, well, there has to be some medium for me to leave, right? So whether it's going to be this disease or that disease or whatever it is that it's taking our life simply becomes the medium.
Thank you, Vidarbhaji.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Delia, go ahead.
Sometimes I listen to Krishna Das when he goes live on Facebook, and he tells the story of this person he's acquainted with, I forget, or was acquainted with, I forget the name, who was a big fan of Jesus. And I'm a big fan of Jesus too. And this person would say, only Jesus died the true death, because he stopped thinking about himself. So I really like that as a way to illustrate, like different kinds of deaths.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. That's like complete fearlessness and complete surrender, and really, that kind of dying is actually considered to be the most glorious of all dying, where one's entire life is meant to uplift others. And in fact, I think especially what he says on the cross, that, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing, so the whole idea of not even holding even a little bit of resentment within the heart, just complete letting go and surrendering to God. Yes. And we'll get to that. That'll be a huge part of our one of our sessions. So sorry for the little interruption. I didn't realize he wasn't feeling that great. So I'll, check in, but yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Yes.
I was thinking that death as a darkness has been represented, but in our Hindu culture, especially, when the people are dying at an old age, it's celebrated. People celebrate that this person lived a good, healthy life and then died peacefully. And I think there is this prasadam that gets distributed. They celebrate the death, such kinds of deaths. Especially people go to Kashi to voluntarily die, because it's a different kind of motivation that comes there.
Yes.
So, not just the dark part, but in our culture, I think that's what I have seen, that people are celebrating the death if it is at an appropriate time.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we are going to get into, that how, we can approach death, not as just something that is going to take everything away, but in a way that, there's so many story over story. One thing that has personally inspired me so much is about how some of the yogis would actually go off. This used to happen like until a few, I guess 100 years also, when people would want to just leave or quit, they would just actually take this very arduous journey into the Himalayas to Badrinath, right? And it was understood that that person is gone, he's not coming back, because it was, it was a trek. So, you know, that was sort of like voluntarily. And then, of course, there is also stories of people who would go into the forest and they would want to die incognito without any, you know, fanfare and without anybody sort of like, you know, they would just leave. They know that it's time and they would just leave. They would go into the forest and they would just take shelter of spiritual vibration, and they would just, you know, leave their body in such a heroic and fearless manner. So, you know, those examples really show us that there is a better way for us to live than, you know, than leaving our body, you know, in a helpless condition and feeling, overwhelmed with pain and lamentation. So that's what the Vedas are all about, is to help us, take us out of that kind of death and help us enter into a more glorious death, one that can allow us to be completely free of all pain and suffering. So maybe we'll stop here. Are we going to talk about suicide? That's a good point, Delia. Thank you. Yes, I think why not? Why not? I think we should talk about stuff that we probably would not normally, you know, talk about. So yes, and I think it will also help us. If you guys have any, you know, anything in particular that you think we should be addressing, just let us know, because we are actually right now working on this presentation, and so yeah, we can address it, you know, in our subsequent sessions. So we'll talk about suicide. I know, Dominic, you talked about grief, right? It's something that you talked about, how to process grief. Is that something that you would like us to talk about?
Yeah, definitely, because it seems like, you know, it's easy to understand these things a little more intellectually. It comes to you naturally, like emotionally.
Yes.
So like just trying to balance out the psychology with, you know, the teachings.
Yes, yes, I completely agree with you. And I think we'll talk about, you know, grieving, and just, you know, just a little something that, you know, grieving is the most natural part of our healing process, you know. And so even though the Bhagavad Gita speaks about things in a philosophical manner, it also acknowledges the fact that, you know, there is this pain that comes from separation. In fact, you know, it is described as the greatest kind of pain, as this pain from our loved, the pain of separation from our loved ones. And so we'll talk about how we can allow ourselves to go through this healing process, and maybe spend one day there. So yeah, thank you for that topic. And I hear the other one is, you know, suicide, or I think that would be a good topic also to look into.
Yep. Hare Krishna. I have another question. It's Ashley.
Yes, Ashley.
Yes. So, is Krishna able to intervene with someone's karmic cycle, like after death? So, say if you die and your karmic cycle, basically, you know, due to your karmic cycle, you would be reborn immediately right again. But is Krishna able to intervene with that based on your personal relationship with him?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Anything is possible. It's the realm of unlimited possibilities.
Oh,
So,
okay.
you know, when once we have the Krishna factor, then nothing is cast in stone. Our karma stops acting. And that's again something, Dominic, if you watch that video and if you have further questions, we can address it. But karma is simply as long as we are caught in this material world. Once we start the process of taking up spiritual practices and trying to surrender to God, then karma technically stops acting in our life. Then our lives are actually directly supervised, overseen, or managed, or whatever, and whatever we receive is actually from coming through the direct hand of Krishna, and he can change anything. He's not bound by these laws of nature.
Mataji, can we talk maybe in some future session about also balancing this knowledge and understanding of our true eternal nature with compassion for the actual human experiences? Because sometimes I see myself falling into this a little bit too, where like somebody is sick, or maybe, you know, like maybe a very elderly person or something. And since I'm like, oh, that person, like they're not going to die, their soul goes on, but it's easy for that to, how to avoid like losing compassion, you know?
Such a good question. My goodness. such a wonderful question. And I'm so happy that you asked that, because that is one of the biggest traps. I think Dominic also brought that up a little bit about intellectualizing everything, right? And sort of missing the whole experience of it. And I think for me, and I'm going to now speak from a very personal place, the idea of personalism really helps me process that, because while it's true that, you know, these things are there and we're not this body and we're a spirit soul, but we are persons. And persons means feelings, and it means emotions, and it means experiencing love and compassion. And unless and until our knowledge, and this is why dry knowledge is actually, it makes the heart very hard, you know, it just hardens us. But bhakti, on the other hand, is meant to make us softer. And so in many spiritual practices or traditions, it is almost, you know, considered to be an indication of your weak spiritual practice. If you, for example, if you cry, or if you experience any pain, or if you experience any love, you know, attachment, then it's almost seen as like, what did you understand after studying all these books, right? But bhakti is actually the opposite. Bhakti is not the denial of emotions. Rather, it is the refinement of our emotions. So we actually experience those emotions in a more in a deeper way even. So actually devotees, it is described that we don't become non-feeling, if that's even a word, but actually we become even more deeply, we feel the pain of others. And there's a word for that, it's called para dukkha dukhi, which means that is the nature of a devotee, is that they experience the pain of others magnified many more times within their heart. And that's without the practice of compassion, or without the cultivation of compassion, all of this knowledge will simply go into our head, and it'll simply make us cold, callous people who are incapable of having any deep feelings. So I very deeply feel this, that we have to be very careful as we gather this knowledge, that it doesn't lead us to like a non-heart experience. And that would kind of, I think, defeat the purpose. And I think bhakti itself doesn't allow for that. Bhakti means love, it means compassion. Like Prabhupada, many times, he would actually, he said, when I see the condition of the living entities, I have tears. And a devotee felt that maybe Prabhupada, was just saying that in sort of like a metaphorical way, that, I feel some sorrow, but Prabhupada said, actually, he shed tears. So this is actually what a devotee is. They actually cry seeing other people suffer. So we are not about becoming cold, unfeeling. And one can test the growth of one's bhakti by how much one is experiencing these richer emotions of love. Hope that helps. Great, beautiful question. Feeling the pain of others multiplied doesn't feel like such a great deal. Yeah. It's true. It's true. It's true that, and yet, therein, lies. Sometimes we want love to always be, I mean, we just want everything to be sweet, but it comes. When you love someone, then there's bound to be pain. How can you take that away, right? And so feeling the pain of others. At the same time, a devotee is also self-satisfied. So that pain is not like you're taking on the pain of others and you're always miserable. A devotee for himself is not experiencing any pain, but he's experiencing pain on behalf of, all the others who are actually struggling. And so it's coming from a place of compassion. And compassion, actually, the experience of compassion and the practice of compassion is actually in itself deeply very satisfying. So it's a very deep topic, but that is actually the mood of Lord Chaitanya, is this constant practice of compassion. I don't know, Dominic, did that resonate with you? Because I know you had a similar kind of a point there on intellectualizing.
Yeah, that definitely resonated with me, and like having compassion. And I do have some emotional moments in just now reading this text and like thinking about, crying is a sign that what are you doing? And you know, just learning to have compassion for that human experience and still validate, you know, what my senses can feel in this world while still being aware of, you know, the soul and connecting to it through that experience instead of like denying it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very nice, very nice. Yeah, and that's actually, that was what attracted me to the process of bhakti, was because before I actually came to this process of bhakti, I was in college at the time, and I met a lady who used to, you know, who was actually 90 years old, and I was 22, and I used to go for walks with her for some reason, you know. So, and she used to talk to me about another tradition within the Vedic tradition, which is based on an impersonal understanding. And so she would talk to me about how she was not attached to anything and anybody, and there was, you know, I mean, I heard her because I was interested in this stuff, and I didn't have the words, but something about it kind of made me feel like, if this is spiritual life, I don't want this. Like, it just felt so dry and so cold, you know, that I just, you know, intuitively, I just felt like something about it does not appeal to my heart. And when I found finally the process of bhakti, I was really drawn, because I felt like, you know, I can, you know, it's about being a person, and being a person means being soft and compassionate and loving, along with the knowledge, you know. So it's a beautiful marriage of both. So thank you so much. It's so nice to have all of you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Hopefully, you know.
I'm sorry, can I
Yes.
make a last reflection?
Yes,
before
yes.
we go?
Yes, go ahead.
There's this idea, just like a general commonly popular idea, that when you die is like when you can have the possibility of seeing God. I'm not talking about like any particular belief system or anything, just this generalized notion. But would it be correct to say that the state of life or the state of death actually doesn't have anything to do with how much you experience God?
Yeah, that's a good point, that it's really based on the state of your consciousness, right? It could be, though, that at the time of dying, we are much more desperate, and so we call out with greater feeling. So we may have some, you know, some special moment of, you know, just like Dominic also asked, you know, we may experience something profound at the time, but yeah, there is no such guarantee, you know. For a devotee, you know, it's also described, I'm just kind of giving this away. The process of bhakti, death is seen as a final embrace of Krishna, because we've spent our whole life, you know, chanting and remembering and serving, and you know, death becomes, you know, that sort of Krishna comes, you know, as the final embrace. And so a devotee is never unhappy or lamenting or, you know, fearful. Yeah. So yeah, it's nice. But can it be an opportunity to return to the Super? Yes, of course. That's the whole idea, Shweta, is that you know, is we want to go back to our you know, to our eternal identity, our spiritual home. We're sort of just wandering around here and trying to find a permanent place, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting for the living entity to, there are many verses, and these are all, again, now the philosophical verses which describe that all of us are coming together like people coming into a motel, and in the morning, you know, everybody goes their individual way, or you get on a train and there's a different stop and different people get off on different stops. So our togetherness is only meant for that much time. And you know, so there are many verses like that. You know, sometimes it's described like we come together like straws in a river. The current of water is so strong, it brings us together, and that same current then separates us at a later point. So there are lots of verses like that which talk about how this coming together and this separation is described in that way. Why do we have to live apart from God or the Supreme Soul and reincarnate in his body? This is in the nature. What a great question, Dominic. Very good question. Yeah, this is a very basic, fundamental question that, you know, what are we doing here? You know, like if this is not my home and, you know, I'm not really this body and, you know, I'm just going through this sort of Ferris wheel existence, you know, up and down. What am I doing here? And that's actually, described in many different ways. It's actually our desire. The living entity, that spirit spark, has the freedom to choose to live under the shelter of either the spiritual energy or the material energy. And so for some reason, which we cannot really understand why, but we understand why because it's our freedom, but we made a choice and we thought, all right, we would rather be the controller of matter, and it would be nice to be the Lord of all I survey. So an example that is generally used is to show a little kid who looks at the mom cooking in the kitchen and says, hey, I want to cook in the kitchen just like you. And the mother says, not possible, so let me give you a play kitchen. And so the child starts to play in the play kitchen and thinks that, oh, I'm also just like mom, and I'm also doing the same thing. But at some point, the play kitchen cannot satisfy, the child. And so then the child actually starts to cry and say, I'm hungry, I want real food. And so our experience here is kind of like that we, each one of us, we want to play God, and that's our sort of, if we describe our existence in this world, we're all trying to control, matter. We're trying to control our inflow of happiness and somehow figure out how we can make it work here. So that's kind of like the God syndrome that we all have, and that's what has brought us here. But at some point, and death actually becomes, that big, sort of jolt, because we realize we really cannot control material energy. It's too powerful. And so then we start inquiring that, is this real or is this not real? Am I just playing in a play kitchen and I'm not feeling satisfied? And so then we start looking back and saying, okay, Krishna, super soul, God, whatever, that I want to come back to you, and I'm done playing here. But Krishna himself never forces that return journey. He leaves it up to us. And so if we say, maybe, this game was great, but if I could simply have maybe that other game along with it, Krishna says, all right, let's try that. So he travels with us. He's not left us alone. He travels with us, and we go through countless lifetime trying out different kinds of outfits, thinking maybe this outfit will fit me and this outfit will make me happy. And each outfit we find that, it doesn't work for us because it's incompatible. It's like oil and water. They don't mix, and we already have, and we try to find, I think for me, I can speak from my own experience, we're constantly looking for that perfect object of love, and we find someone and we think, oh, I finally found the person that I can love. A child starts out his life, thinking, oh, my mother, I remember when my son was very little and I was, homeschooling him, and he would always say to me, he said, you homeschooling me? When I have my kids, you're going to homeschool my kids. And I would say, what is your wife going to do? So, well, she's going to go shopping, but you're always going to be with me, right? So that's kind of like this whole mother-child bond, right? Like, this is your universe, like you're always going to, and yet we know that's not true. The child grows up, then you need friends. And then you grow up a little bit more, then you need, a partner, and then you get whatever married, or you have your own kids, then that love, that object of love keeps finding a new, place to repose. And then you have children, then they become your center of life. And then like that, it continues on. So we're always looking for someone that we can love completely. And, the Bhakti tradition says that actually that person that we want to really love is seated right within our heart as our soulmate. So, I've kind of rambled on, haven't I? But, anyways, Dominic, yeah, go ahead. Thank you. So hope that helps. I mean, it's a big topic and we can keep touching on it, as we go along.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So all right. So we'll see you tomorrow. Stefano, so beautiful. Thank you so much. Just it's a joy to have all of you and your wonderful questions. And